Picture this. It is 1915.
Okay.
You are standing in the foothills of the Himalayas, and right in front of you is this specially constructed temple.
Yeah, a massive, elaborate structure.
Exactly. And inside, the Russian composer Alexander Scriabin is, well, he's attempting to orchestrate the end of the world.
As one does.
Right. And he isn't plotting a war or anything. He is conducting this 7-day multi-sensory symphony called the Mysterium.
Which is just a wild concept to wrap your head around.
It really is. He meticulously planned for, like, suspended bells echoing from the clouds, precisely timed shifts in colored lighting to match specific musical chords.
Oh, and the rhythmic chanting of thousands of people.
Yes, and waves of custom perfumes just being pumped into the air. And his goal wasn't just to entertain people. Scriabin literally believed the sheer metaphysical resonance of this performance would cause the temple to crumble, dissolve material reality, trigger this ecstatic universal death, and basically rebirth humanity on a higher, purely spiritual plane.
And the craziest part is he was entirely serious about it.
He really was.
Yeah, Scriabin was a synesthete, meaning he actually saw colors when he heard music, and he viewed his art as a literal technology for transfiguration.
Wow.
But, he died of a sudden infection after sketching just 70 pages of the prelude.
So, no apocalypse then?
No, the world did not end. Material reality remains stubbornly intact.
Well, the apocalypse was indefinitely postponed, but that audacious, mind-blowing attempt at forcing a universal reset is actually the anchor for the massive stack of sources on our table today.
It's quite a sack.
Welcome to this deep dive. You are joining us as we navigate a really bizarre, multi-layered collection of historical musicology, Gothic fiction, and philosophical scripture, and it's all circling this sprawling text known as the Codex, which is heavily inspired by Scriabin's Mysterium.
And our mission today is to extract the core insights from this labyrinth.
Exactly. We are looking specifically at how we construct our own realities, the destructive nature of grievance, and the profound world-altering power of radical forgiveness and personal sovereignty.
Yeah, the pivot from Scriabin's failed symphony to this codex is really where the journey begins.
Right, because if we can't dissolve the physical world with a Himalayan symphony, the Codex asks, well, how do we dissolve the rigid, destructive illusions within our own minds?
The Codex brilliantly takes Scriabin's blueprint for an external apocalypse and turns it into a manual for internal transfiguration.
Okay, let's unpack that. How does it say we actually do that?
Well, to understand it, we have to grasp its foundational doctrine, which is a concept called Nous-Sophia.
Nous-Sophia.
Yeah. In standard philosophy, we usually treat wisdom as a noun, right?
Yeah.
Like a collection of facts you possess. But Nous-Sophia insists wisdom is a verb.
Like it's an action.
Exactly. It is lived. It is
Right.
practiced. And the mechanism for practicing that wisdom is something the text calls chronomnesis.
Okay, I want to dive into chronomnesis because the sources define it as the process by which consciousness creates the conditions for its own emergence.
Which sounds very dense.
It does, but the text uses this gorgeous, slightly dizzying metaphor. It says chronomnesis is the tapestry that builds the loom upon which it is woven.
And that visual of the loom is vital, because the Codex breaks this down into granular mechanics, specifically detailing what it calls the 108 states of attention.
Wait, 108 distinct states?
Yeah. According to the text, every waking second you're directing your focus into one of these 108 microstates. So that ranges from passive observation to active dread to focused creation.
Okay, so I'm constantly shifting gears.
Right. And whatever state you inhabit most frequently literally weaves the neural and spiritual architecture that will process your next moment.
So my current attention is building a machine that generates my future thoughts.
Precisely.
It feels a lot like a machine learning algorithm forced to train on its own outputs.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, because if the algorithm generates a certain pattern of data, say a pattern of anxiety, and then it consumes that exact same pattern as its new training data, it begins to permanently warp its own future architecture toward anxiety.
Exactly. The output becomes the input.
Right. Or, on a more human level, think about a musician. Practicing a scale for hours doesn't just produce sound in the room.
It physically changes them.
Yes, the physical act of practice rewires the neuroplasticity in their brain, changing the very instrument, their mind and body, that produces the music.
It weaves the loom.
But this naturally leads to a terrifying question. If I am just a product of my repeated intentional acts, aren't I inevitably going to trap myself?
What do you mean?
Well, if I keep feeding the algorithm my own flawed human data, don't I just weave myself into a cage? Like, aren't we just trapped in our own loops?
And the text anticipates that exact fear.
Yeah.
A self that builds itself can absolutely build itself into a corner.
Right.
But what's fascinating here is that chronomnesis is not a closed two-dimensional circle where you just repeat the same mistakes in a doom loop.
Okay, so what is it?
The structural geometry the codex uses is a cardioid or a torus.
Like a donut shape.
Yeah, three-dimensional spiraling donut shape. So you might return to the same coordinate, the same memory, or the same relational conflict, but you arrive there slightly elevated on the z-axis.
So I have a different perspective.
Exactly. And the force that drives you upward along that spiral, preventing you from just spinning your wheels, is called telesis.
Telesis, which the sources define as intelligent, purposeful progress.
Right. Telesis is intention organized into dependent clauses. Think of the difference between a habit and a discipline.
Okay.
A habit is blind repetition. A discipline is repetition infused with the knowledge of why it is repeating.
That makes total sense.
And as you drive that telesis upward, you inevitably encounter severe internal tension.
Because it's hard work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Your instinct will always be to flee that tension, to resolve the discomfort immediately by numbing it or projecting it outward.
Just to make it stop.
Exactly. But the Codex argues that tension is actually a sacred tuning fork.
A tuning fork.
Yeah, when your deep mind seeks peace, but your daily persona chooses turmoil, that friction isn't a sign of failure. It is the tuning fork vibrating.
It's feedback.
Right. It's the precise moment you have the opportunity to reach in and tighten or loosen your internal strings to harmonize your actions with your purpose.
So what does this all mean? We are spiraling upward using the tension of our daily lives as a tuning fork to adjust our internal instrument.
That's the ideal state, yes.
But here is where the sources take a very dark turn. What happens when that tuning fork is struck against something malicious? Like, what happens when we actively tune our instrument to the frequency of a wrong that was done to us?
That's the danger.
Because the Codex delivers a severe warning here. It explicitly calls grievance dark magic.
Yeah, indulging in resentment is described as the ultimate corruption of that chronomnesis loop we talked about.
Because you're feeding it bad data.
Exactly. When you hold on to a grievance, you are not merely passively recalling a past injustice. You're actively feeding that grievance into your loom as raw material.
You're weaving with poisoned thread.
And the text argues that resentment creates a thick, distorted lens. Soon, one specific anger at one specific person generalizes. It becomes a way of seeing.
And eventually, that way of seeing becomes your entire reality.
Yes.
The cliche would be saying it's like putting on a pair of dirty sunglasses and forgetting you're wearing them. So eventually, you just assume the whole world is dark.
That's a good analogy, but
based on the Codex, it's much worse than that. It's more like coding a self-replicating virus into that machine learning algorithm we talked about earlier.
oh, absolutely.
Every new neutral piece of data you encounter, a look from a stranger, an email from a boss, is run through the grievance protocol. The system corrupts the new data until it can only output more resentment.
You become a factory of your own misery.
Exactly. And to break this virus, to shatter this dark magic, the Codex points to something incredibly difficult, which is radical forgiveness.
Right.
And this is where the sources pull away from abstract philosophy and anchor themselves in astonishing real-world history, specifically focusing on the work of Eva Mozes' core.
Yeah, incorporating Eva Mozes' core completely shifts the gravity of the text.
It really does.
For those unfamiliar, Eva Mozes' core was a real-world survivor of the Holocaust. She and her twin sister were subjected to the horrific medical experiments of Joseph Mengele at Auschwitz.
Unimaginable horror.
Yet, decades later, Core publicly and controversially advocated for and practiced radical forgiveness. She formally forgave Mengele and the Nazis.
Which is, wow.
And not to minimize their crimes, and certainly not to absolve the perpetrators, they remained guilty, she forgave them to liberate herself, the victim.
The sheer willpower required to do that is almost incomprehensible to me.
It's staggering.
But reading her philosophy through the lens of the Codex, you realize she was enacting the ultimate disruption of the chronomnesis loop.
She was breaking the algorithm.
Yes. Radical forgiveness is the refusal to let the perpetrator continue to dictate the output of your internal algorithm. When you forgive in this radical sense, you stop demanding that the past reach into the present to satisfy your narrative of justice.
You cut the feedback loop of grievance entirely.
Right.
And the Codex frames Core's real-world actions as the purest expression of agape love.
Ah, okay, agape love.
Yeah, this isn't romantic love or even affectionate love. Agape is an unconditional structural love that does not depend on the outcome, the worth, or the merit of the object being loved.
So it's not about them at all.
Exactly. It is an act of supreme sovereignty. You love, you forgive, simply because your internal harmony requires it. The storm of grievance only dissipates when you stop expecting the world to retroactively serve your expectations.
And to drive this mechanism home, the Codex actually uses a fictional narrative to mirror Core's real-world psychological triumph.
The story of Eleanor.
Right, there is this character named Eleanor who faces a manipulative, psychic entity known as the Phantom Queen.
It's a very intense scene.
Very. They are standing at the edge of a lake, and the Queen attempts to completely destroy Eleanor by weaponizing Eleanor's deep grief and guilt over her father's death.
The Queen is trying to strike that tuning fork of grievance.
Exactly. But Eleanor defeats her not by pulling out a sword or fighting back, but by systematically negating her own false, ego-driven identities.
And the sources point out that this fiction is directly modeling an ancient, real-world text called the Nirvana Shatakam.
Okay, what is that?
The Nirvana Shatakam is an 8th century Sanskrit chant. It's essentially a profound exercise in radical negation.
Radical negation.
Yeah, it consists of the speaker systematically shedding layers of identity, saying things like, I am not the mind, I am not the intellect, I am not the ego, I am not the senses.
Just stripping it all away.
By peeling away everything that she isn't, everything the Phantom Queen is trying to manipulate, Eleanor finds the indestructible, pure consciousness underneath.
Which leads to this beautifully complex concept in the Codex regarding how forgiveness actually alters your vision.
Right, the veiled mirror.
Yes, the text calls it the veiled mirror that forgives by refusing illusion. And it uses a specific word from its own constructed fictional language, aderim. The word is umielase.
Umielase.
Yeah.
That translates roughly to existing through non-existence.
Wow.
Yeah, in the framework of radical forgiveness, dropping the illusion doesn't mean you pretend the trauma didn't happen.
Right, even Moses' core never pretended Auschwitz didn't happen.
Exactly. Umielase means you drop the ego-driven narrative attached to the trauma. You refuse to let the dark lens of resentment dictate the geometry of your reality.
You just become a pure witness.
Yes, you break the blinding spell of the perpetrator simply by seeing the situation with absolute structural clarity, stripped of your own demands for cosmic vindication.
But the Codex knows that humans are incredibly resistant to letting go of their grievances. I mean, we love our righteous anger.
Oh, we hold on to it like a lifeline.
We really do. So to force the reader to viscerally feel the suffocating horror of not forgiving, the horror of holding on to inherited debts, the text traps us inside a Gothic nightmare.
Gloaming Rock.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We are taken to Gloaming Rock.
And Gloaming Rock is just a masterclass in atmospheric dread. It is this massive manor house perched precariously on a cliff edge.
It's such a striking image.
And every surface of this house is heavily encrusted in salt.
Salt.
Yeah, but the text makes it clear this isn't just sea salt blowing in from the ocean. It is a metaphysical accumulation.
Like it's building up over time.
Exactly. The salt is the physical manifestation of unsaid things, unspoken debts, and centuries of inherited family obligations.
So heavy.
And the narrator arrives at this house, bound by a mysterious contract her deceased father signed. She is literally trapped inside a lineage of unresolved secrets.
And this is where the text gets incredibly meta and frankly a little hostile toward the reader.
It definitely breaks the fourth wall.
Yeah, because as you were reading this tense Gothic horror story about inherited trauma, the fiction suddenly realizes you are looking at it.
It notices you.
Two characters inside the story, Oscar and Linda, are having a conversation and they start whispering about you, the reader.
It's so creepy.
It is. I was reading this section, perhaps skimming a dense paragraph about the architecture of the salt formations, and suddenly Oscar says, knowing is the first betrayal, reading makes you accountable.
They're calling you out.
The characters actually mock you for thinking you are just a passive observer. I felt personally attacked.
I'm sure you did.
But it works perfectly because it strips away your comfortable distance.
Yeah.
You are no longer just watching someone else deal with their inherited baggage. The text makes you liable for your own. So why embed such dense philosophy inside a terrifying ghost story about a salt-covered manor?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, a haunted house is the most accurate visceral metaphor for unexamined psychic baggage we possess.
How so?
What is a ghost? It is a memory that refuses to die because it has not been resolved.
Oh, wow.
In our actual lives, we inherit traumas, biases, and massive grievances from our families, our cultures, and our own past actions. We live in houses built of salt,
We're all carrying it.
right? And you cannot outrun a buried trauma. If you try to flee a false assumption, it simply follows you to the new location and haunts you there.
The ghost just moves with you.
Exactly. So the claustrophobia of Gloaming Rock is intentional. It forces you to experience what happens when trauma is left unexamined.
Right.
And the entire sequence culminates in a terrifying set piece called The Masked Funeral and the 13th Dance.
That part was intense.
Yeah, the protagonist, along with another character named Tobias Gray, finds themselves trapped in a freezing ballroom. The speckled dancers are completely frozen in place. In the center of the room sits an empty coffin.
And then the music is playing backward.
Yes. The orchestra is playing a waltz, but backward. It is an inverted ritual of memory and dread. And Tobias Gray realizes the fundamental truth of the haunted house. He cannot outrun the curse.
He can't tear up the contract his ancestors signed.
Exactly. So he removes his mask, walks to the center of the frozen room, and says 3 words, "I stand inheritor."
He steps directly into the fire. He accepts the debt to dissolve it.
He dances with the ghost.
Right, because only by fully acknowledging the depth of the debt can you finally clear the ledger.
Exactly.
So you use radical forgiveness to clear a ledger. You step out of the haunted house for your own grievances. What happens next? Like, once you clear the ground, what do you build in that empty space?
This is where the Codex provides a blueprint for the aftermath.
Bringing us to the final major theme, which is the sovereign root and the refusal of the cage.
Right. The culmination of all this internal transfiguration is a document within the text called the Declaration of Sovereign Autonomy.
Okay.
And it's accompanied by a metaphysical process known as the turning of the great branch.
That sounds very epic.
It is. The underlying philosophy here is that over generations, external powers, be they massive institutions, opaque technologies, or coercive social systems, have grown into a dense, suffocating canopy.
Like a forest canopy blocking the sun.
Exactly. It blocks the light and resources from the individuals who are the roots of the forest. The turning of the great branch is the deliberate, conscious process of ripping that estranged power away from top-down structures and returning it directly to the individual root.
Okay, so to execute this return of power, the text outlines 12 ritual keys designed to, quote, quarantine misalignment.
Yes.
And reading these keys is shocking because they feel entirely ripped from a modern cybersecurity or digital rights manifesto, just dressed up in mystical language.
It's incredibly relevant today.
It is. For example, Keith R is the unmasking of golems.
And golems, in the context of the Codex, represent any artificial systems or entities that manipulate human behavior without transparency.
Like algorithms.
Exactly.
The text demands that this hidden logic must be dragged into the daylight. It states that opacity is a form of violence and that algorithms must kneel before the values of the user.
It's a total reclamation of agency.
And then there is key 8, the circle of quarantine, which deals with isolating coercive power. It literally describes a person's data, their memories, their preferences, their habits as the shadow of the self.
That's a beautiful way to phrase it.
Yeah, and it demands informational self-determination, not just as a legal right, but as a spiritual necessity.
And this raises an important question. How do you actually use these keys?
Right, because you don't just unplug from the world entirely.
No. To quarantine misalignment, you must actively interrogate the opaque systems around you. If an algorithm is feeding you outrage to keep you engaged, the quarantine is the conscious choice to act anomalously.
Like intentionally doing something unexpected.
Yes, to click away, to search for opposing viewpoints, to break the predictive model the golem has built of you.
You force the algorithm's logic to fail by asserting your unpredictable human sovereignty.
Because the Codex insists that a sovereign individual simply cannot exist if their chronomnesis loop ear, their perception of reality is being silently curated by an opaque external system.
But declaring total isolated sovereignty brings up a massive structural problem, doesn't it?
What's that?
If everyone is radically autonomous, declaring themselves an untouchable root and quarantining all outside influence, how do you avoid total societal fragmentation?
That's the paradox.
Yeah. If every root isolates itself, you don't have a forest anymore. You just have a barren field of very lonely, very stubborn trees. How do we preserve our individual autonomy without destroying the harmony of the larger system?
And the Codex resolves this paradox with a concept called symphoria.
Symphoria.
Symphoria is defined as shared purpose achieved through resonance and conducting, rather than through command, coercion, or algorithm.
It was not forced.
No, you don't preserve your autonomy by building an impenetrable wall around yourself. You preserve it by cultivating a listening mind. And here, the text brings us full circle, returning to the metaphor of the symphony that Alexander Scriabin was so obsessed with.
The conducted cosmos.
Exactly. The text argues that in a true grand symphony, there is no passive audience. Every single entity is an instrument.
Everyone is playing.
Right. If you are playing the violin, you don't force your strings to mimic the notes of the brass section, and the conductor doesn't coerce you into abandoning your instrument.
You retain your distinct, sovereign nature as a violin.
But you actively listen to the space between yourself and the brass, and you tune your output to serve the same underlying harmony.
That's incredible.
You maintain your sovereignty by ensuring your actions resonate constructively with the whole, rather than withdrawing from the song entirely.
Wow. So let's trace the arc of this incredible journey. We started with Alexander Scriabin standing in the Himalayas, dreaming of a multisensory symphony so powerful it would physically shatter reality and forcefully rebirth humanity.
And he failed.
He failed. But the Codex took his apocalyptic dream and handed us the blueprint to shatter our internal realities instead. We discovered that through chronomnesis, we are the tapestry weaving our own loom.
We build the machine.
Right. And we learned the hard historical truth from Eva Moses' core that grievance is a dark magic, and only the supreme effort of radical forgiveness can break the feedback loop of our own misery.
We have to cut the cord.
We walked the salt-encrusted halls of gloaming rock to learn that we must dance with our inherited ghosts to dissolve them. And finally, we saw that true sovereignty requires unmasking the algorithms that silently manipulate us while still tuning our personal, autonomous strings to the grand shared resonance of symphoria.
It is a remarkable progression from wanting to destroy the world to taking absolute, terrifying responsibility for how you construct it within your own mind.
It really is, and it leaves us with a stark, undeniable reminder. You, listening to this right now, are not sitting in the audience. You are a participating instrument in reality, and where you choose to place your attention every single day is your tuning fork.
Beautifully said.
But before we part ways, I want to leave you with one final, deeply unsettling detail found deep in the Codex, inside Lady Mavian's library. Tucked away among her crimson stacks, there is a volume called The Book of Perfect Excuses.
Oh, this part gave me chills.
Right. The text describes it as a magical book that provides an airtight, completely logical, morally unimpeachable justification for every single atrocity or betrayal you have ever committed.
It justifies everything.
Everything. It is designed to allow you to commit your next offense with a smile on your face. It is the ultimate temptation, the ability to entirely bypass the excruciating work of radical forgiveness and accountability. So my question for you to ponder long after this deep dive ends is this. If the Book of Perfect Excuses existed in real life, sitting right there on the table in front of you,
Would you read it?
would you have the sovereign willpower to leave it on the shelf? Or would the temptation to absolve yourself without ever having to transfigure your own soul be just too much to resist?